Counselling Microskills, Reflecting Meaning.
Okay, so Jeff, we're going to pick up
Mm-hmm.
again on the issue of theoretical orientation.
What microskill was that? Transparency.
What is it about the solution focus that grabs you as a person?
What microskill was that? Questioning.
When I was just a brand new therapist, maybe a year out of my master's program, I was working in a place, and we were kind of playing around with all these kind of strategic therapy, paradoxical brief therapy ideas, and it was kind of fascinating because all the stuff seemed to work so dramatically and quickly, but I just couldn't figure out how the hell to do it. And, it was like all this Milton Erickson stuff that seemed to have some kind of crazy magic to it. But it was really hard to figure out. And so I have an urge to be tidy and to, in terms of thinking, and to be pragmatic. So I had a supervisor at that point actually who said, "Oh, I think you'll be really interested in this." And it was the first book that Steve DeShazer wrote that was really identifiable as solution-focused therapy. He'd written some other stuff before that. And I dug into it. And for me, it really captured, I think, what I was looking for at that time, which was like 25 years ago, was something that was practical, and it was really elegant in its simplicity. And that was really important for me. And then I got into a stage where I kind of slavishly taught myself these kind of solution-focused skills.
What microskill was that? Silence.
Because I was kind of running a program. It was really formulaic at that point, but I got really good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to realize that it was actually more about listening and being present with people than it was about asking the questions in the right sequence and having the correct the correct sequencing of particular skills. Right.
So the questions gave you some security at the beginning as a new counselor, but then over time you've evolved your own art in a sense.
What microskill was that? Reflecting meaning.
Yeah, and there was always different, it's almost like a layering process. There were always different additions of different sets of ideas. And I think I came to understand what I was doing at a different level. I can still fall back on the questions. I can easily get into a solution-focused sequence of questions at the drop of a hat. So then, some different ideas started to get mixed in.
So if you had to go back and look at what you identified as the magic at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
now that you've done all of this analysis over the years, what would you say the clue to that magic was?
What microskill was that? Questioning.
Having something to grab onto that it fit where I was at the time, like in terms of it was kind of theoretically related to the stuff that I was playing with and wasn't very good at. So it was kind of close enough to what I was doing, and it was very clear. And I got very clear about what to do in the room as a counselor. So that was the initial attraction.
And now that you're at this, much more mature end of this process, mature theoretically, what would you say is the continuing appeal of it?
What microskill was that? Questioning.
Well, the other thing to say about that, and I'll come back to this, is that I've had a bunch of different pieces added to this kind of first really strong kind of solution-focused piece. But I was really moved by an article that a colleague wrote she's got has been influenced by Buddhism, and she wrote this chapter called "Solution-Focused Therapy is a Spiritual Practice." And the whole premise of the article was that the more you express curiosity about people, and the more you actually ask people about what's going right in your life, what is it that's working, the more, and that's actually transformative, right? The more you focus on what's, I'll use the word good, not in the sense of good versus evil, but the more you focus on what's good and what's working, the more it naturally orients you to do that more, and to maybe step out of kind of typical ideas that we have about what creates problems. Right? So stepping outside of that. For me, it was actually that idea of, as I exercise these skills, these verbal stems for different kinds of questions, that actually did change my perspective about people.
So it shifted not only your sense of confidence in terms of having something that you could work with that allowed you to just...
That was the first thing.
Freely,
Yeah.
and it kind of freed you up to engage more in the relationship that you were involved in, which we know has an impact then on the success of the counseling process. But it actually shifted how you were viewing the way in which people were presenting to you and how they would get to where they wanted to be.
What microskill was that? Reflecting meaning.
And it really, I began my work life, with working with people who had big problems, right? Like young people in residential treatment or, stuff like that. So when you're working with people with big problems, it's pretty easy to get pessimistic or caught up in the problem. And so actually changing focus, shifting my attention onto what people are doing that works, if only a little bit, changed my perspective about people, period. Right?
So in a sense, there's lots of literature on the role of hope in the whole counseling and change process, but it sounds to me like it shifted your hopefulness around
Absolutely.
the other person.
What microskill was that? Reflecting meaning.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you were going to explain to a novice counselor the kinds of basic assumptions you have about human nature and about people now, what would you say?
What microskill was that? Questioning.
This is really tricky because the way people usually say it, talk about this as, I'm hopeful and positive about people. And it's not in a kind of Pollyanna-ish kind of way. I wouldn't want anybody to think that, people who know me know I'm kind of cynical, right? So I wouldn't want anybody to think, everybody has the capacity to change. I wouldn't want to present that. Change is often difficult, but I think that people are resourceful, even when people are really immersed in big problems. They're resourceful about minimizing the impact of those problems and responding to those problems in some way. People are resourceful, and it's like panning for gold, right? That as counselors, it's like figuring out what's the nugget of stuff that people are doing that's helpful in a way that they may not even know is helpful.
So give me an example of a time when it was really tough to try and find that hopeful piece, and how the solution-focused perspective would enable you to draw that out of a client, or to find that in yourself on behalf of the client. Or
What microskill was that? Probing.
Yeah. A sort of general category, in terms of a particular problem, right? Like lots of times, I've seen people who have been on the receiving end of some kind of abuse. And this is not to minimize, the devastating effect of that. So I think it's tricky to be empathic with that and at the same time be hopeful. But I think that once I I would say, matured in my approach when I was able to not just be, and I think that sometimes people get too positive, and this sometimes people think solution-focused therapy is being like rah, 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 right? But once I matured in my ability to be present with clients, I was able to ask in a respectful way, what have you done that's made some impact? How is it, or even, how is it that you keep going? Given that you've been through all this crap in your life, how do you keep, putting one foot in front of the other and continuing with life? How do you do the things you need to do to, be a good parent, or to be a good employee or a spouse or whatever, right? How do you keep going in the face of this? So being curious about that in a way that doesn't sound disrespectful or sound minimizing of the difficulty that the client's experiencing, it's combining those two things.
So it really does come down to having that really genuine relationship with the person so that you can gauge where to go with these questions and which questions are going to be appropriate and which questions aren't going to be appropriate, and how far you can kind of, this isn't the correct wording, but push the edge in terms of what that person is going to be able to respond
How
to.
how to maintain the right pace.
What microskill was that? Reflecting meaning.
Yeah, I think that's crucial.
So if you were in a place where you were going to go for therapy, would you pick a solution-focused therapist?
What microskill was that? Clarifying.
Probably not.
Okay, tell me about that.
What microskill was that? Probing.
Because it wouldn't be novel for me.
Okay.
And the other thing is, I would intentionally not, because I would be critiquing the person's technique.
Yeah, so it'd be too difficult to take yourself outside of the role of the therapist and be really present.
Well,
What microskill was that? Reflecting meaning.
therapist, trainer, supervisor, right? Because I've done tons of training with people. And I don't think I could tear myself away from doing that.
Okay, so what kind of approach would you pick?
What microskill was that? Clarifying.
I don't know. I don't know. Something that I might go see Paul or somebody like Paul. I don't know, because it would be a totally different way of thinking. It would just have to be different. I think I would be more focused on the person's reputation, or what I'd heard about the person's ability to connect with people and to be respectful. I don't think I would be concerned about the particular theory they espoused.
So it would be more important for you to have confidence in the person's skill level than to be tied to a particular theoretical orientation.
What microskill was that? Paraphrasing.
But it'd be better if it wasn't one where you could anticipate where they were going.
What microskill was that? Reflecting meaning.
Oh, I think that would be a reason for me to not go, actually, to see somebody who was, known as being, solution-focused or narratively oriented or something like that. It would be the reason for me to not go.
Questioning.